Alright, so I just wanted to point out a couple of my views on different exotic weapons and the way they've been balanced. And a lot of people look at this in more black and white kind of terms, but I've pointed out these thoughts to a bunch of different people, and some agree, some disagree, but I haven't seen these kinds of opinions anywhere online at all. So I figured I'd just put my thoughts out there for anyone who wants to hear. So, to start with the thorn, because it's a pretty decent example of the kind of things that I'd like to point out. The thorn, originally when it was introduced to the game and it first started popping up, a lot of people said that it had major issues, and it did have some issues in my opinion, but I didn't see it as this atrocity that everyone else seemed to label it as. A lot of people pointed out that the damage was subpar, and it's an exotic, and it's supposed to be amazing, but it fell pretty well in line, in my opinion, with other hand cannons at the time, where not every exotic is supposed to be just a super-powered version of the legendary one. Some are, and some aren't, but that's mostly to add diversity and whatnot. Where the thorn fell into one of two categories that I like to group exotics into, where they're niche exotics and there are pretty much generic styled exotics, which fit more into what most people expect of an exotic, where it's just a super strong version of like a legendary or something. But the niche exotics, to me, were always the most interesting, because they specialized on different styles of play and added more diversity to the way you enter a fight. And with the thorn, when it first came out, contrary to what everyone else really says, it was pretty strong in my opinion, because pretty much every time I got into a fight with someone who had the thorn, I did die. But the problem there was that it wasn't always the person with the thorn who was killing me. It was, to me, it felt more of a supportive styled gun. And I saw most of the people that were using it had some small understanding of this at very least. And they played it in a supportive way where they would stay in cover and poke out to hit a dude who had just gotten into a big fight while he's trying to escape or whatever. And what that did was, it did the poison damage, which at the time was like absolutely nothing. But I didn't see the poison damage as just a means to do extra damage. I saw it more of a strategic advantage, where you shoot someone with it and their shields take at least double the time to recover because of the poison damage, which could play a major role in a lot of fights in larger groups, where one person could potentially draw out a battle to the point where he gets support and things like that. So what pretty much happened every time I fought a thorn was the person would pop out, hit me a couple times, I'd either win or lose, but if I survived that and killed him, unless I can go a solid 5 to 8 to 10 seconds before I enter combat again, I'm at a huge disadvantage, and thus I pretty much get killed before I can even do anything. And if you do this to a large group of people, one person can just come in and completely destroy all of them without any resistance. But the problem that led people to not really do this is common with most first-person shooters that have any support-styled play, because the person with the thorn, or the tool that's giving their team massive advantage, isn't getting the majority of the points for it. So he's not as inclined to use that weapon because he's not getting rewarded for his efforts and the way he's swaying the battle. So the people would end up using something else because they might get an assist, they might not, but the real ramifications of it are huge in the battle. So you may get way less points and people might think poorly of your play, but you could very well be swaying the battle and be one of the main pivot points that made your team win. But what gets me really confused is the way they decided to fix this. What they ended up doing was turning the gun into one of those generic, overpowered styled guns where it just does a shitload more damage rather than what it used to do, which I kind of was disappointed in because they took a very strategic tool and just turned it into this overwhelming weapon, which completely changed what it was all about. And you see this with a lot of the niche style exotics, like the hard light and other things of that nature. And some of them do have serious problems, but I still have yet to get all of them, so I can't really give my educated opinion on something that I haven't tried before. But one of my favorites would be the hard light, which, to me, I love the thing because it gives you this corner shot advantage, which a lot of people say, why would you only do that? That's completely worthless. But what it gives you another angle of attack, where you can throw people off their guard by hitting them from the side around a corner. And yeah, you're not as likely to get a full kill that way, but you'll definitely surprise the opponent, you'll push him back, you'll do all sorts of things which could confuse and really make the battle more of a deep experience. And they keep changing these things and taking it from a really interesting experience with all sorts of strategy and surprise and sneak attacks and things, and they turn it into this calculated DPS versus DPS kind of roll of the dice. Like, they turn an encounter of surprising your opponent, tricking them, and strategically taking on challenges, and they turn it into this blind run forwards roll of the dice where it's like, okay, is he using something that does this exact number of DPS because my gun does exactly this number of DPS, and that decides the winner, which is really a boring experience. And that's not to say that this whole system is completely bland in that respect where there is nothing else to it, but to the average person, like someone new coming in and stuff like that, that's really what they're going to see. But to go back to something more in the current time, I've looked at a couple of the patch notes and things for the 2.0 update, and I really don't see the Thorn fitting the same role that it did in the beginning ever again because of the way they've scaled the poison damage. I can't see them bringing the poison damage back down to such a minimal amount. I see it getting some nerfs, and I kind of like the way they're trying to put guns back in their roles, which is one thing that always had me interested in Bungie-related games, whereas other games would have guns that, not intentionally, but they would just be better in multiple ways to other guns, and it was not really a choice if you were trying to play competitively or something. But with Bungie games, every single gun in its own specific encounter was optimal, where there was always at least one situation where a certain gun would be highly advantageous as opposed to any other. But one of the things that I thought was a little curious was the way they were adjusting the hard light, being one of my favorites. I read that pretty in depth. But it seems like it's heading in the direction of the Thorn. I don't see it becoming the same kind of threat, but it very well could be. Because the one thing that I will agree with is increasing the amount of rounds that bounce and the sharper angles you can get out of it. I definitely agree with that. But by reducing the fall-off damage on the rounds to never, and increasing the stability even more, it takes away the role of the gun yet again. Where, at least to me, the hard light looked and felt like a close-range to kind of mid-range assault rifle, where most of the assault rifles were mid to long and fit somewhere in there. The hard light was more of a close range gun. And by doing all this to it, it's going to perform obnoxiously at long range. And on top of that, its close range ability is going to be increased as well. So I have yet to try this update or anything because it hasn't come out yet. And I will be checking that out, but from the numbers and the things that I've seen, I can see it going in that direction where it becomes just an all-around beast because of the lack of damage fall off. But not just that alone. Coupled with the stability, if the stability is too strong, which it already kind of is compared to what it started as, which obviously games grow, games change, but pairing all that together with my current experience and my estimates with those numbers, I feel like they might be getting rid of that range increase very quickly. Oh, and one other small thing before I wrap this up. The stat bars, or whatever you want to call it, on the information thing for each gun, they need to do something about that. Because one of the most frustrating things for me is when I look at, maybe not the thorn so much because of the poison, and that's just confusing, but stuff like the last word. When you look at the impact and you shoot it, and then you put on something like the ill will, and then you shoot it, the numbers do not match at all, and I feel like that needs to be fixed.